All right, guys, thank you so much for being here. My name is Manny. Welcome to another industry session. As I was mentioning to you guys earlier, I haven't done these in quite some time, been a bit MIA with CGMA and everything else, but really lucky to be back on the scene, so to speak. And, it's like because I hadn't done this in such a long time, I wanted to kick it off in style. I wanted to bring out the big guns. So, we're really, really happy to have Omar Gatica, who is not only an amazing artist, but also one of my great friends. So as you guys know, Omar's going to go over his workflow in terms of giving you, just an overview of how he works, and then after that, we're going to go into a series of questions that you guys had, prepped beforehand or asked beforehand. But that still doesn't mean, if you guys have any questions during the session or, further clarification on something that Omar has brought up, definitely feel free to ask away. All right. As you guys know, Omar is one of the amazing instructors teaching the art of lighting for games with CG Master Academy. So towards the end of the session, we'll talk a little bit about that. And if you guys have any specific questions regarding the class, definitely feel free to ask away. All right. We don't have any sponsors for this particular session, so I'm going to say this session is proudly sponsored by CGMA. All right. We're going to go with that. So, all right. Enough of me. I'm going to hand it over to my boy. Oh, hey. Take it away, Omar.
All right. Well, thanks for having me here, Manny, and thank you everybody who joined in. This is really cool. This is my first time doing something like this, so I'm excited. I will probably make mistakes. I'll probably be all over the place, but hopefully you can get something out of it. And like Manny said, just feel free to chime in if you have any questions or thoughts, or if we're talking about something that you want to know more of. So yeah, with that, so Manny asked me to kind of talk about my overall process as I'm setting up a level, and I can talk about that. We can just talk about that. I don't have any work examples per se. We can also look at some screenshots that I have prepared, and we can look at some Unreal scenes where I can just kind of demonstrate how I would be setting up what I'm doing. Essentially, when I work lighting, it's like anything else. It's like sculpting or painting or.
I'm terribly sorry. I dropped the ball on this one. If you could first off introduce yourself, a little bit about your background.
Sure, my bad.
Yeah, you can start off with that, and then we'll come.
Yeah, so as you know, my name is Omar Gatica. I've been lighting for games for going on for a little bit over 10 years now. I've worked on games such as Uncharted, Call of Duty. I've worked on cinematics for Guild Wars. I've worked on commercials. I've worked on a couple of smaller movies. So just kind of bounced all over the place, but I've really found my niche in lighting for games over the last 10 years. It's a great place to be. I really enjoy what I do. I feel I'm very fortunate to be able to be in a position to do what I'm doing. And yeah, I've recently started teaching the art of lighting for games with CGMA, and that has been a great experience. It is really kind of it is surprisingly, I feel it has made me a better artist. It has made me more sensitive, more communicative about methods and ideas, and I've surprisingly found that people were a lot more receptive to it than I expected. So that has been a great challenge and a great opportunity that has come up in the last year. So, once again, thanks to CGMA and Manny for that.
Cool. All right. So now let's kind of get into your overview of how you work. Like, what's your process, weapon of choice?
So just like anything else, I look at lighting as it's the same as sculpting. And Manny, you can attest to this. Manny's an amazing modeler and sculptor. But I start big and I start big and I whittle it down. We iterate. So we block out our shapes. We figure out our sky intensity. We figure out the direction and the value of the sun. There is a technical aspect to lighting, and a lot of times you will find that lighting departments are actually structured under tech art or under some kind of technical discipline as opposed to environment art. That has just been the way it has been for a long time, because there are a lot of technical considerations when you are lighting. But I see that as an interface. So once you get past the interface, then you're just being an artist. You're just lighting. And that is the same as getting past, the keyboard if you're a writer, or getting past the brush and the paint to the point where you can just express yourself without thinking about the technicalities of the craft. And that is nothing more than just practice, just experience. And I try to reiterate that to my students, that really the only difference between me and them is just that I've been doing this for a long time. But it's all practice. It's not magic. It's not anything ethereal. There's very much a specific a workflow and a set of guidelines that I a set of let's say a rule of thumb that I'll work with. And then, like any art, once I know that that's in control, then I can start breaking the rules as I see fit. I can start pushing and bending and it's very much a sculpting of the 3D space with light. So I see it as a very organic process. Manny, is that cool? I mean, should I show some examples?
If you can show some examples and kind of just take us through, through your process. Like, in other words, working as a professional lighter, what's the first step? Like, are you giving concept art, photographs? Usually, yes. By the time I get a level, there is a certain mood in mind. Now, that mood might have been established through concept art and narrative, because it's an SP level and it's there's a lot of narrative considerations. Or that might be something where it's an MP level and the designers they have an idea for gameplay and it revolves around a dark, nighttime map, or it revolves around some kind of interior that needs, certain considerations. So there's always a foundation there. There's always something that I'm working for. And that is just because when we come into the picture as a lighting department, design has already gone in, and we're at the back end of the pipeline. So concept has figured stuff out, design has figured stuff out. They've probably made changes and iterations. And once environment art and lighting get in, a lot of these things have already been thought out. That doesn't mean that they are set in stone. That doesn't mean that we don't change things. We play the levels quite a bit, and we have conversations about them, and we figure out what works and doesn't work. And once again, it's another thing that I like to stress, is that I feel that it is equally or more important for artists to be able to make mistakes, for us to figure out what works. So that to me is a very important process, and it's not that there's ever a hard and fast blueprint where we just come in and do exactly what's on the blueprint and then move on. It's very much an organic process where we see what works and we make changes, and a lot of times we make dramatic changes, in a short amount of time, because together. So cool.
So yeah, that's a big part of the process. This here is just it's actually a scene from the first week of my class. But just to give you an idea, the first thing that we do, I approach this class as if it is a proxy of a production environment. So the first thing we do is we look at the sky and how that is set up, and we look at the lighting from the sky, or the image-based lighting, and we tune the value of our indirect light, which would be our sky and our sun. We think about things like the direction that the player is walking in, what the golden path of the level is, and we think about how that would how the choices that we make at this stage will fit the overall gameplay and the overall traversal path of the play space. And then, like anything else, we start to get into some of the interiors. We start to figure, we're getting some good response in here, but obviously the back of the cave is going to need us to go in there and carve stuff out. We're going to have to think about bounce light. We're going to have to think about filling areas out that aren't getting that aren't already getting filled out. And we also take a look at setting up our basic utilities like reflections and light grids or light mass importance volumes, and things that are a little bit more on the technical side. But I do like to stress that once you get a handle on whatever the technical restraints are on your level, whether you're doing a level where you're doing a game that uses light maps and employs a baked solution for the indirect light, or you're working on something that's like Grand Theft Auto, where everything is deferred and rendered at runtime, or anything in between. There's a lot of different solutions. There's a lot of different game types, and there's a lot of different ways that the engines work, and then there's a lot of different solutions to solve those problems. But what I try to stress is that the ideology, the way you think about it, the way you approach it, generally tends to remain the same. Kind of analogous to, you can be a character artist and you can design humans and robots and Disney characters, but the way that you approach human anatomy remains the same. You're still identifying certain shapes and looking for the readability of those shapes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great. So now we're going to go into some of the questions that you guys filled out in the survey beforehand. And these help us tailor the sessions or these webinars based on what you guys are really interested in. And I'm going to go back and forth between some of the questions you guys have already asked beforehand and some of the questions that are live within this session. So Sam is asking, will you go over the use of blueprints, Unreal 4 blueprints, as part of the lighting setup in your course?
I actually do not. I'm actually not an Unreal guy. I don't work in Unreal at work. I work in a somewhat of a proprietary engine. So Unreal is just the tool that we use for this class. And I think Unreal is extremely powerful. It's extremely accessible, and it's extremely powerful. But I don't actually, well, I get into a very, very slight blueprint setup in that I show you how to set up a skybox or a sky dome for the use of both image-based, actually not image-based lighting, but for the use of seeing the sky in the game. We do use the same image as the image-based lighting source, but it's a very simple blueprint, and it's the only blueprint we really discuss. And that is because I really try to make this class about the thought process and the ideology of how you would approach a level. The fundamentals are always going to be and what change are the names of the tools and maybe the steps and the orders that you go through to do them. In the same way that you have to learn a slightly different interface if you want to use ZBrush versus if you want to use Mudbox. But once you get past that, what's important is that the thought process and the tool set that you have to approach these problems is the same. I try to give the students a practical way to approach lighting the scene.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So speaking of just the different softwares that you utilize, whether it's for the class, or for what you do at IW, what softwares do you prefer to use for lighting?
That's kind of an interesting question, because we rarely get the choice as lighters. We just have to use whatever the project demands. So I work, like I just said, I work in a proprietary, it's a proprietary editor for Beauty, but it's really just based on the Quake engine. And it's been modified over many, many years, so it's very unique, but I have to work. I don't have a choice. I enjoy working in Maya because I'm just an old school Maya guy. And I have worked at some studios where we just used Maya and then just exported everything into the engine and baked it. So I do like Maya because I'm comfortable with it. Recently, I've been doing a lot of my personal work in Redshift, which is a third-party renderer that plugs into Maya. In my case, it can plug into just about anything, but it plugs into Maya. And like I said, for the purpose of our class, I really like Unreal because you can get amazing looking results, and it's in my opinion, it's very user friendly. The interface is not that difficult to get around, and the most important part is it's extremely accessible. So I think Unreal is a great tool. I've played with Unity. Unity has some great stuff. Unity is constantly getting better as well. But right now, yeah, between Maya, Maya for my pre-rendered stuff, and Unreal for any kind of like personal work that I'm doing that's game related. My two faves.
Cool. And
Yeah.
I see you guys are a little confused by, and thanks for that answer, Omar. I see you guys are a little confused
No problem.
by my name here. So I had a really bad cold, a bad sore throat. So there was a chance that my partner Ted was going to do the session. So if I am replying to you privately as Ted Davis, it's me. All right. We just didn't have time to switch the name over. So but Ted is here.
Say hi, Ted.
Moving around.
Come in and say hi, Ted.
You want to come in and say hi?
Don't be shy.
Say what's
Don't
up,
be shy, Ted.
There you go.
He is. Hey, Teddy.
All right, cool. So, Rajit. One day I'll get that name. Ranjit has a question. How do you manage light mass in huge scenes of environment, like huge environment scenes?
So once again, I don't work in Unreal. So we have everything that I do in Unreal. We have basically something analogous to that. We do have to think about the optimization and the size of our space. But light mass, as it exists in Unreal, is not really something that I have to manage at work because we don't use Unreal. And as far as the class goes, we just make sure that the playable space, the area that we're working in, is covered with that light mass volume. For anybody that is an Unreal guy, you know what I'm talking about. But essentially, when we are at work, what is analogous to light mass is we define a volume around the playable space where the player is going to be interacting, where there's going to be combat or any kind of traversal. And we try to have a volume that fits that as tightly as possible within reason, right? And that is basically what defines to our engine the area of importance where it needs to focus its shadow detail, specifically in the sun shadow maps. Reflections are laid out by hand, and the light mass volume takes care of the spherical harmonics, if you will, for a level in Unreal. We basically have a separate volume that we lay out that takes care of all of that. And the spherical harmonics is just the way with which the engine samples the information that's baked into the light map and translates that to any kind of actor that is in the scene and is not a part of the light map bake, right? So they don't have any way of knowing what the ambient light around them is other than by looking into the light grid or the light mass importance volume or whatever that system of spherical harmonic cache data is.
Cool.
Yeah.
So Michael has a question. Will the course cover specifics in Unreal 4 for things like baked lighting, bounces, light map, res, compression, etc.?
Yes, we don't really talk about compression because that is something that is going to be unique to whatever engine you're working in. However, they compress their light maps or materials. And just to give you an example, I have control on Call of Duty. I have control over whether or not light map compression is enabled, and I have control over how many light maps I will allow the level to generate. So I can set it to automatic, and the level can generate as many, or the baker, the compiler, can generate as many light maps as it sees fit, or I can clamp that number to something specific. However, that's going to be unique to whatever pipeline you're working in. And on top of that, I do not have any control over how the compression is applied, what kind of compression is used. That is hard-coded into the system and is engineers. So it's not like I can have a level and pick JPEG compression over, Targa. I can enable compression on or off, and I don't necessarily have the choice in the sense that if a level does not run, and I have to enable compression, well, then I have to enable compression for that to actually fit on the allotted disk space that we have for that. So there's many considerations, and a lot of times in games we don't necessarily the decisions that we make about compression and how many light maps we export and some of those technical issues are global variables that we determine at a higher level in the game production, if that makes sense.
Cool. No, that's great.
And actually, Manny, I feel like
yeah.
read me that question again. I don't. I think I only answered half of this question.
Okay,
So,
yeah. So, will the course cover specifics in Unreal 4 for things like baked lighting, bounces,
oh, okay,
light
right,
map, res, and compression?
right. So, bounce light, bake lighting, yes, we talk about all of that stuff. And I like to think of those as global concepts. This is not anything that's unique to Unreal. We talk about it in the context of Unreal because that's the tool that we're using. But I try to, as much as I can, talk in a what I like to call a software agnostic uh, perspective, where these are concepts that apply to whatever you're going to be using, whether you end up working in Unreal or CryEngine or Unity or whatever, some proprietary engine that your studio uses. Um, so yes, we talk about indirect light, we talk about bake light, we talk about all of that stuff. But like I said, the approach is more from an aesthetic art approach as opposed to the technicalities of Unreal. It really is designed to be uh, for you to grasp these concepts from whatever perspective you are approaching this class from.
Great. And this is a question that it's perfect timing because this is going to be my next question from the ones that everybody submitted earlier. And this is also a live question that's been upvoted a couple of times. But Alina would like to know the difference between indoor lighting versus outdoor lighting. What's the difference in process for those two?
Well, outdoor lighting, you get, for outdoor lighting, 90% of what you're getting from the sun and your sky. So the most important thing is to make sure that that is set up right, that you've chosen the right image-based light for the aesthetic of your scene, and that now that we're working in a physically correct, you'll often hear PBR, which is physically based render, and HDR, high dynamic range images. When we're working with these variables, the amount of energy that is represented in your sky HDR has a huge impact on what you're doing. And so getting that balance right is key. Getting the sun to balance right and to fit in is key. Whereas when you're working with an interior situation, which honestly, local interior lighting is some of my favorite. But that is it tends to be a little bit more sculpted by the artist. It tends to be there's a lot more to have to think about and place and kind of design, if you will. So, for example, a space like this that you're seeing on this screenshot, we're having to think about where we can place lights, what's going to accentuate this level. We essentially get more into a interior design mindset, if you will. And I kind of say that's fresh in my head because there was a question about interior design. But we do have to think more in terms of that, in terms of, we're not lighting architecturally, but we have to have some kind of idea of how things work. And then we have to, as artists, be able to cheat that so that it is as moody and as dramatic as the scene requires. And it fits within the restraints, the limitations that we have of our engine.
Cool. Could you show some examples of the two, Omar, and possibly some of the challenges you face regarding,
Yeah. So let's jump over to this. Let's go to this scene. So this is actually a scene. This is the same scene that you saw at the beginning here in the daytime. This is one of the. We go back to it in one of the courses, and this is a good example of how we got a good foundation here with the exterior lighting. Like everything else, we come in, we block out the sky and the direction of the sun. But there's a significant amount of lighting that we're doing in here. Everything in this cave is directed by the artist, right? So there are lights placed where the lava is, the way that the shadows are being cast, this light here hitting the throne, all of this is hand placed. And all of this is a thought process. It's I like to say it's a bit of science in the sense that I just don't go in here with lights and start placing things and guessing and just being willy-nilly. I'm making informed choices and informed decisions about where and why I'm placing my lights. Some of those choices are just based on the light source. So if in here I have a big lava pool, well, obviously that's going to be a brighter source, and I'm going to play that up. And then other choices that are being made. Let's get out of this. Let's show our lights for a second. Other choices that are being made are, excuse me, are directing the, sorry, I got a little bit lost in here. Other choices that are being made are directing additional light, the directing shadows. So here's a light that you wouldn't think would be placed here, but it's actually directing. When I say directing, it's giving me directionality. Or it's filling out the area depending on what I need. But this is all being crafted in a specific way, and these are all choices that are being made, whether they're placed by instinct or experience or trial and error. These are all things that factor into how we place lights and how we develop this stuff. And just a final note, there's no, I might have concept that illustrates this or that gives me an idea of this, but there's no hard and fast blueprints where we come in and I know that I've been instructed to place lights in certain areas and at certain angles. A lot of these are choices. It's like having a client that says, I want a cake that's going to be blue and chocolate on the inside. Okay, I know what you want, but there's still a lot of decisions that I need to make as the person making the cake that go into that I'm not necessarily going to, I'm going to try it out, and if the client doesn't like it or wants a change, then I will address that. But I feel that using the client analogy, that the studio that employs me, or the quote-unquote client, is essentially hiring me not just to do the work of lighting the level, but he's hiring me because of my experience and my sensibilities. He's hiring me because of the choices that I am going to make. And that's really, lighting is really all about choices. It's all about, where do you want to, how do you want to shape the scene? Where are you going to put your lights? How are you going to balance that out from a technical point of view? Because we can only afford so many lights at a time. There's a lot of things that go into it. So
no,
yeah,
great answer.
I hope that's a good answer. Sorry. Sometimes I find that I'm rambling on, and it's really easy for you to get me to ramble on about art. So, just pull the reins if I go too far into the weeds.
No, I think it's great. So Eva is asking, my fear was always not knowing the render engine. If coming into a job, as I got too comfortable with V-Ray. Is it a huge obstacle usually for not knowing other renderers as you should?
I would say no. I mean, you're going to learn whatever tool your studio uses. So at least when we're in the hiring process, we don't really care what software you use. We might use because I have an understanding of Unreal, and if I know you use Unreal, I can get a little more technical and ask you how you approach certain things. But what we're really looking for is that you have an understanding of the concepts of what we're doing and how and why, and that you and honestly that you are flexible enough to pick up what we're doing, and also someone that we want to work with, and that you're a good fit for the studio and the culture. So I think the most important thing is understanding how games work and why we do certain things. And I know it's kind of hard to, whenever anybody's in an interview, you're nervous and you want to do your best, but just be yourself and relax and talk about what you know. We look for people that are passionate, we look for people that are excited, and we look for people that have an understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing it, and that they have a willingness to learn.
Great. No, I think that's I completely agree. I think whether it's lighting or modeling, animation or anything else, it's having that skill and having that passion. The software is just another tool, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Manny worked at DreamWorks for many years. I'm sure you saw this on your end, where you would have guys come in that were just. Did you ever have anybody that was just a great sculptor and just needed to learn the software in general? Did you guys ever?
Me. You need
the software when I met.
So, and I don't want to deviate from the session, but at DreamWorks, when I started there, when I first started there, 13 years or so ago, they were using NURBS batch modeling, which is a completely different way of modeling, and I was just used to polygonal modeling. And so going into that, it's like, there was definitely a bit of a learning curve But you realize the strengths and weaknesses with the different softwares or application that you're using. But at the end of the day, it's your eye. That's something that is always going to be consistent. As long as you have a good eye, once you understand the tools, it's just a matter of just executing. So, talking about that, it's like how long does it take? How long would you say it takes you to light a scene like this, or how long are you given to work on some of your scenes at work?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question, and actually saw that was written in. I would say that I never really finish a level. I just run out of time. That's just from an art point of view. Like as artists, we always want to push and polish, and if you give me another week, I'll take that week, and if you give me another week after that, I'll take it. On average, and I'm just throwing out very general numbers. This stuff, it really depends on the level. Depends on what you're working on, how big the level is. We might have a single player level that is in production for anywhere between 3 to 6 months. We've had some levels that have been in production a lot longer because we go back and redesign or retweak things. And then sometimes we have multiplayer levels that are maybe in production for 2 to 3 months, maybe 2 to 4 months, depending. It depends on the schedule. It depends on the scope of the level. It depends on a lot of different factors. The stuff that I'm doing in the course of the class, I'm doing this in pretty much real time. So all of these are being lit in about 2 to 3 hours throughout the course of the class. There's a little bit of editing, so yeah, there's some stuff that gets cut out. But the students, I always tell the students, I try to give them the most important beats of what I'm doing, but remind them that this is just an exercise in practice, in practicing these methods. So this is not your one time to light this. Take what you've learned here and continue to light things, continue to practice, continue to get scenes, download them, talk to your friends who are taking environments, or maybe they have geometry that they want lit, and you have a lighting that you need geometry to practice on, and work something out. I really do see it as just times at bat. The more you swing the bat, the better you're going to be at hitting the ball.
I think that's a great analogy. So speaking of the course, Kerr is asking, what skills do I need before taking the class? Do I need to bring my own model?
No. So I provide all of the models you see here are downloaded from Unreal, and what I've done is I've gone in, cleaned them up, taken out the lights. I do a demo, and then I give you a blank file that is just exactly where I started from on the demo. The only thing that the artists do is that they, I will give you a sky that you can use. I'll give you this sky that I'm using, but I also give you resources to where you can find other skies for free, so that people can have some options and some flexibility to play with different times of day. But you don't have to model this stuff. This is I will provide this stuff within the curriculum of the class. As far as your background in 3D, you have to know how to navigate in 3D, right? So like if you've never touched 3D before, this is not a basics 101 of moving around and working in CG. You have to have an understanding of what lights are, and just the basics, know what a spotlight is, know what a point light is, know what a directional light is. Other than that, I will take you through all of the steps. You should be able to follow along and to keep up. It's designed in a way where you should be able to keep up. There's more extensive information on the class website as far as the requisites and what's expected. And you can always reach out to CGMA, or you can even email me directly, and I can kind of assess where you're at, or figure out if you're ready for it. But once again, the whole goal of this class is to talk about and examine lighting for games as artists. So when we talk, yes, there will be some technical aspects that we'll talk about. Reflections are broken. This is why. This is how you fix it. This is how you set up a light grid. This is how you set up a light mass importance. This is how you set up a sky. But for the most part, I try to talk in terms of artistic. I try to talk in an artistic language. So I will be talking about contrast. I will be talking about the gradients of light as they pertain to the play space. We'll be talking about temperature, mood, um, and I really do try to keep it a more artistically oriented class than a technically oriented class.
Cool. And just so you guys have that link to the course, I've added as a sticky to the chat. So talking about, just expectations for the course as it relates to workload, Sophie was asking how many hours should be spent per week on the course. That's number one. And her second question is, will there be additional assignments? I once had an opportunity in CGMA class for showing my own works and get feedback for them as well. So those are the two questions. So the first one is, how many hours should a student allocate to the course each week?
As many as you can. I don't dictate how much time students can spend on their classes, and I fully acknowledge that people have lives and responsibilities, and sometimes your workload is heavy. Sometimes you got things going on. So I try not to dictate how much time people should spend on the class. If you can spend a couple hours a night, I think that would be ideal. I have some students that are very enthusiastic and very aggressive, and I have one student right now who's really talented, does great work, and he literally does 2 or 3 different versions of every assignment. And I've told him, you don't have to do 2 or 3 versions, but he wants to, and that is more practice, right? So, if you're learning how to dance, if you spend 3 hours a week practicing, you're going to be a lot better than if you only spend 30 minutes a week dancing. But it's just a matter of what is available to you. I would recommend that if you could spend anywhere between an hour and a half to 2 hours a night, I think that would be ideal. But like I said, I don't dictate how much time students should spend. And I'm not gonna, when I get feedback, when I do feedback on the assignments that they do every week, I will give you feedback based on the level at which I think you are. So if you're a little bit more novice and you're getting the fundamentals, I'm going to give you feedback based on that. I'm not going to, get on you about having to do some really advanced techniques. And inversely, if you are showing that you have, some experience and some aptitude and you're doing well, I will probably push you a little bit more in terms of the smaller points. The granularity of the detail. If you're showing that you're doing more detailed work, I'm going to give you feedback on that work. And then as far as your question as, whether or not these are the only assignments, these are the assignments that I provide. It's a 10-week course, and we do a different assignment each week. There's 2 different weeks. The last 4 weeks of the class, each assignment is 2 weeks long. But other than that, there's a different assignment every week.
Cool.
And I kind of have a policy where, within reason, if you show me something, I'll give you, if you show me something and ask for my feedback, I'll give you feedback on that. So if you want to show me your assignment for the week and then you did some stuff on the side and you want to show me 1 or 2 renders of that, I'm more than happy to tell you what I think and help you out with that. That's totally cool.
Great. So Sylvia is asking, what kind of exercise you would recommend for someone to improve their overall understanding of lighting? I thought that was a great question.
So yeah, that is a great question. So there's 2 things. I like to look at, first of all, I really think that as artists, we should all kind of see art in general as really all part of the same thing. So don't draw distinctions between saying, well, I'm really into certain movies, but I'm a video game artist, or I think this guy's a really good painter, but I'm a video game artist. That doesn't apply. It all applies. It's all connected. So I like to watch movies and TV shows when I can, and I like to there are certain directors and cinematographers that I think do amazing work. There's certain TV shows where I can just watch them and just be really I can just really enjoy the lighting in every shot. So just seeing what you like in other forms of media, whether it's film or paintings or TV, I think is great. Having a background in photography, if you like photography, having an understanding of photography, getting involved in just taking pictures, in thinking about composition, basically putting yourself in a situation where you are thinking about composition, values, shapes. And then the last thing, I say this a lot to a lot of my students in my class, a lot of the feedback that I'm giving you is really feedback that's based from a life drawing point of view. So if you've ever taken a life drawing class, you learn to identify and render shapes on paper in 2D, but to render them in a way that's three-dimensional. And that is a lot of what we look at. And I'm sure, Manny, you can attest to this. I'm sure that CGMA offers life drawing classes.
Yeah, we offer quite a few more traditional, figure drawing, life drawing, dynamic sketching type classes.
Oh, I'm sorry, still life.
Oh, still life. Actually, I think that, dynamic sketching, the dynamic sketching series of classes definitely covers quite a bit of still life. Yeah, it's all that.
Life drawing is the study of drawing the human form, and that's equally important. I mean, that's great. A lot of I like to use still life, and a lot of still life drawing is just drawing spheres and cubes and fruit. But what is important about this is that in all of these exercises, they are defining, they're rendering a three-dimensional image on a two-dimensional canvas, right? It's just paper. So you're rendering this in 3D and having an understanding of how the light falls off and how we identify shapes, we identify cylinders and spheres and things like highlights, core shadows, rim lights, fill, key lights, that kind of thing is super excuse me, super important, and it's very much a part of what we're doing. So I highly recommend just taking any kind of a still life drawing class. Take a figure drawing class. That's great as well. You know, if you take a life drawing, excuse me, and Manny, feel free to stop me if I'm getting into the weeds, but the human form is a series of spheres and cylinders. So this is great. If you learn to identify the shapes and think about what makes them read, whether you're taking life drawing or still life, it's a very good skill to have, and this is a very good it's a very good foundational skill set to be able to say, yeah, I can break this down into its basic elements and then talk about or make decisions about what makes this render. Like,
yeah, it's all connected. It's all connected. So speaking of that though, and this question kind of ties into it, what would you say is a major difference between lighting for real time versus pre-rendered?
Yeah, well, there's a fairly okay. So there's many differences, but first off, let's take a look at what the two methods have in common, right? So both games and film create the illusion of movement through playing a sequence of still images at a fast enough speed that it fools the human eye into thinking that it's one continuous image. Now, consider how long it takes to render a still image using a software GPU, right? So I can be, here's a little scene that I have in Maya, and this is a fairly fast renderer. I'm using Redshift, which is a GPU renderer. But still, when I'm rendering a scene right now, it's going to depend how long that render time is going to be. It's going to depend on the size of the image, the complexity of the image, the quality that I want the render at. The renderer may be drawing geometry, materials, ray tracing reflections, calculating GI, sorting transparencies, subsurface scatter, a ton of different operations, right? So it could take half a minute, it could take several minutes, and in production, it could take hours, right? It could take hours to render a single frame for any given movie. A game engine also has to render images consisting of geometry, material, lighting, VFX, many other components. However, any given game has to render each image 30 to 60 times each second. So rendering a compelling image at that speed with limited resources of the hardware is what defines the biggest challenge in terms of rendering runtime versus pre-rendered scene. To me, that's the biggest, it's a huge hurdle. And it's amazing what we're doing these days. It's amazing what we can do in games. It's amazing what we can do on a cell phone these days compared to, think about 30 years ago, when it was Super Mario Brothers. And now, like, what we can do is on a phone is amazing. But yeah, that's in my opinion the biggest thing. And it's still like, it confounds me when I think of how much we're doing at runtime.
Yeah, no, it is. Same here. So, obviously, it's like, as you mentioned earlier, talk to you about lighting. You can go on forever. So, what are some of the things that you would say is your favorite aspect of lighting in general? Like what drew you to wanting to focus on lighting?
I think I was lucky that I in a big way I fell into lighting. And I saw another question about just kind of how I got to where I'm at. So sorry.
I think we got a visitor.
Yeah.
Your apprentice.
Say hi. You say hi? You say hi? Yeah. You're on the internet. Yeah. You're on the internet. Yeah. That's my boy. Go play. Go play. You want to stay here? All right. I'm sorry about that. There was a question about how I got into this field, and it kind of parallels this question. So maybe I'll talk about both. And Manny, please keep me on the road here. I know that I'm kind of rambling, but I feel that I was fortunate enough to fall into lighting. When I got out of art school, I kind of wanted to be to be in visual effects and to work on movies. I wanted to work on Star Wars. Like all artists out of school, a big part of what you're doing is just trying to get your foot in the door, trying to pay your dues and figure out where you're going to fall in. And after a few odd jobs, I ended up falling into this company called NCSoft. And I was hired as a generalist, but we had one lighter. We were doing pre-rendered cinematics for a game called Guild Wars. And they had me helping out the lighter because that's where they needed help. So I kind of fell into that role, and I learned a lot on the job from this great lighter named Ernie. That's coincidentally also where I met Manny. So Manny was an awesome character artist working for that studio. We became friends, and we've been friends ever since. But I was very fortunate enough to fall into that role, and I really enjoyed it. It was something that was in some ways not new. I mean, I knew what lighting was, but I didn't have any experience with it, and I didn't know what I was doing as far as, in terms of making something look good and the choices and how the art came into it. So that was a great experience to be able to be a part of. I learned a lot on that job. I then got picked up by Activision, and I was picked up by an internal team, Central Tech, to do pre-rendered cinematics. I did a lot of R&D stuff, and I did some marketing materials as well. From there, I was actually recruited by Naughty Dog in around 2007. They needed help working on this new project that they had called Uncharted. And I was fortunate enough to be a part of the first 3 Uncharteds. And from there, I went to Neversoft. Neversoft was doing, Neversoft had been doing Tony Hawk. They had done Gun, which is a really cool game in the past, and they had just finished up doing the Rockstar series. And they were going to start working on this Call of Duty project. And so they wanted to hire a lighter to kind of help, help build up a lighting team. They didn't actually have a lighter at the time. So I worked at Neversoft. That was a great experience. I met a lot of great people. It was a lot of fun. And unfortunately, Neversoft closed down, but we merged into Infinity Ward, who we had been co-developing the game with. So it was a good fit. And Infinity Ward has been it's been a ride for the last 4 years. Wow, it's been a lot of fun. I've met a lot of great people, and we're at a point right now where we are doing some really exciting work in the field of runtime rendering and capturing images, capturing skies, baking light, all of that stuff. So it's been a great process for me to go through that. But I guess kind of going back to your initial question, I feel kind of lucky that in a way, like, this path was what opened up for me. It wasn't that I had a direct goal to become a lighter for games. Lighting for games wasn't really a thing. It was something that a few studios were doing. Naughty Dog was one of the first of them. But it was kind of a field that is opening up. And even now, I still find that a lot of places will say, well, our environment guys do all the lighting. We don't really have a lighting department. Our environment guys do that. And that's valid, but I think as games get bigger and they become more complex, you really start to realize that this is a dedicated job. Like, it's a lot of work to just do this. To ask somebody to do this, and on top of that, model and texture is more and more a thing of the past. As far as AAA games, right? So that's kind of how I fell into lighting. What I like about lighting is that it really gives me I have an enormous amount of influence over the mood and the feel and the look of a level, and that's awesome. It's really cool. It's a big responsibility. It's not something that I do in a void by myself. I have art directors. We have other artists that I'm constantly collaborating with. You know, we it's a whole production. But my favorite aspect of in general terms, my favorite aspect is that I have such a broad influence. On a smaller level, things I like, you know, there are days where I like to just come in and just do reflections, and I don't have to. I can kind of zone out, and I know what I have to do mechanically, and I can just let my mind wander. There are other days where I'm doing interior lighting, interior pieces, where it's a lot of creative decisions that I'm making, and I'm having to solve problems and figure out why something doesn't work, or how we can make, you know, get the look that we want within the limitations that we have. So there's a lot of fun stuff. There's a lot of things that I really enjoy about the job, and I feel really fortunate that I've been able to be a part of it for all these years. I feel very lucky for that.
No, great. So speaking of that, in terms of, you know, getting to the industry, Atia would like to ask, what advice do you have for students wanting to get into lighting as a career directly?
I think the same advice for anybody wanting to get into any aspect of this, really to get into any career, is just perseverance. And, you know, I can attest to this. I know Manny can attest to this. Just about any successful artist that you meet can attest to this. Just keep doing it. Just try to be positive. Try to be excited. It sucks to get turned down for a job. It sucks to apply for a job and to be nervous and go through the interview process, and maybe you even do a test and it doesn't work out. But try to not let that defeat you. Don't let that slow you down. Try to learn from that and try to go into the next interview, the next test, whatever it is, with that much more knowledge, with that much more experience. Be critical of art. Be critical of your own art. Be open-minded to criticism of your own art. It hurts. It's hard for an artist to hear that, you know, hey, this doesn't look good, or this is not working, whatever the case may be. You know, artists are by our very nature, we're sensitive. We're you know, we take things personally. We take things personally. So it's important to not get caught up and not let that stop you, and allow that to be something that you learn from and that you continue, and just keep going. You know, we've all been turned down. We've all been rejected, and it's not, you know, it's not great, but it's a part of the process. You know, I think Manny could probably attest to that as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think you answered it perfectly. It's definitely part of the process. So, so the next question we have is, Bertrand wants to know, how would you set up the sky material?
So can you tell me more specifically, are you asking just the material itself as we do in Unreal, or like for the class, or are you talking about how do we get our skies, how do we acquire our skies and set that up in general, or in the context of my particular game that I work on?
And while he works on that, the way he works on that, it's another question I have is, what are some, go ahead, Omar.
Well, if you want, what I can do is I can just talk a little bit about how we set it up at work. I think that's the more exciting answer, to be honest with you. So if you don't mind, I can talk a little bit about how we set it up at work, and if that's not answering his question, you know, he has time to check back. So lately we have been investing a lot in capturing our own skies, and there's several reasons why we're doing this, but the most important reason is that when we capture our own skies, we can also measure the values at the time of capture that we're getting in the scene. And then when we get back into the game, we can match those values. And we know that from as a physical lighting model, we know that our values are correct. I know that I'm getting the same amount of energy in this CG scene that I got at the time of recording. So that has been a really exciting process. We've been doing a lot of panoramic photography. So this is one of the locations that we were at. This is the rig that we're using, and this is just taken from my phone. This is not taken from the information that we captured with the work camera. But you can see the environment. It's really cool. We take this image. We take 300 degrees, a 300-degree capture, full bracketed range. So we have an HDR range, and you can see some of the tools that I have on the ground and next to the tripods. We're actually measuring those values at the time of capture. So it's really, to me, this is a really exciting process that we're going through, and I'm super excited that I work for a studio that is supporting that, and that sees the value in that, and the investment in.
No, I think that's great. So looking at the scene that you're working on now, Sam wants to know, do you ever create, the render that you have going on? Do you ever create renders such as the one that you have up now as a base to then try to replicate that within a game engine?
No, actually, what I do is I just go online and I find images that I like, and I try to recreate. So here you can see the plate. I was just kind of building on top of that, and then I started going in this kind of Blade Runner kind of foggy light coming through the window. So I deviated from what the source was. But when I'm doing personal work, I generally, one of the things I try to do, if I don't have a specific project that I'm working on, I try to every once in a while just go online, find some scene that I like, and try to recreate that or use that as the foundation for something I'm doing, basically in 3D. In this right now, I'm just really into rendering in Redshift, so that's why I'm doing this. If I'm working in Unreal, I will totally, I'll totally get reference, and I stress reference. I stress artists saying, hey, show me some reference, go online, find some images, let me know what your target is. And it's really cool when students will do their assignments, and I get to the reference, and I'm like, oh man, you are totally hitting those values. Like, I see where you're getting this. It's really cool to see that come together. When I'm at work, I might pull reference for a specific scene that I'm doing. If I'm doing something has a certain mood, or I've watched a lot of old movies, and old being just like from the 80s, and like not super old, but I'm a big fan of all the old Star Wars, the Back to the Futures, Die Hards, all the mobster movies from back in the day. So a lot of times we'll be doing something at work, and there'll just be something that I remember, like, oh, I remember this scene in this movie, and I'll try to replicate that or do a little homage, or there'll be bits that I'll borrow from that. And that is just artistic license. That's just, as artists, we all are influenced by other things that we've seen or done, and that is what, our take on that is what makes us the artists that we are. But mind you, I do have concept. I do have, art direction. I have a lot of input. And a lot of times, based on narrative, or based on art direction decisions, or based on high-level decisions, we might be working on something that just gets changed at the end of the game. And it's not personal. It's not that they don't like your work. It's just, hey, we need to pivot. The game, we're doing this now, so we realize that we need to make a change in the direction.
Cool. Just a couple of people are asking this. Would they be able to get in contact with you after the session? Because I still have another 20 or so pre-canned questions from the audience, and then I think live questions. I'm looking at about a queue of 30. Wow. So obviously we're not going to be able to get through everything. Omar has been gracious enough to extend the session for an additional 20, 30 minutes, but I know we're not going to be able to get through.
I'm happy to go overtime, for a little bit.
So what would be the best way for them to get a hold of you, Omar? Do you want them to?
What would be the best way, Manny? You guys can email me at CGMA if it's 30 questions or queue of questions. What we can do is, there were some questions that were submitted earlier, and that I kind of jotted down written responses to them. So, Manny, if you want to post those, that's totally cool.
You know what? I think that's a great idea. Yeah. So what we'll do, I think that's a really great idea. So what I'll do after the session, guys, because it takes us about a day or so to just edit it, and then put it on our YouTube channel. We'll and I obviously will email everybody who signed up with a link directly to that. what I'll add to that email is a Word doc or PDF with the questions and answers that Omar, had already gone through. So that way you guys will have that. So I think that's a great idea, Omar. So, all right. So moving along. So Ganesh has a couple of questions here, and I want to make sure. Okay, yeah. So Ganesh's question is how do you go about, what's the best way to learn how to light realistic lighting for characters? Because I know obviously we've been talking a lot about environments because that obviously plays a huge role, but how are characters treated in a real time production?
Well, so as they are treated as far as in the game, in the actual gameplay, it kind of depends it depends a little bit on the game, right? So if you look at a game like Uncharted, it's a third-person game. You have a character that's walking around in front of you the whole time. There's a lot more detail and attention that goes into that because that character is taking up a significant amount of real estate in front of you. Whereas on a first-person game, we put a lot of detail into the view model, so the hands holding the gun. And our characters are highly detailed, but we have a LOD system that for optimization purposes will turn to lower detail versions of those characters at a distance. However, we don't really. I think that the question that he might be asking is more from a cinematic perspective. And when we're doing cutscenes and cinematics, which there are 2 weeks in the curriculum of the Lighting for Games course, the Art of Light for Games, where we specifically look at lighting for cutscenes. And that is a more intricate system of, yes, we do have light rigs for the characters. We can animate those lights to change position, value, color, intensity per shot. So we can use those lights over and over again, from one shot to another. And it's much more analogous to the lighting that you would do for like film or TV or any kind of pre-rendered animation. It's more of a studio lighting kind of setup. Well, it's any kind of setup that we need, but it's more of there's a character rig that we will employ. But generally for gameplay, there's not like a character rig. We're relying on the lighting in the environment. We're relying on the sun, the dome, and we're relying on local lights. And that's why a big part of what we do when we're lighting gameplay environments is play the game and figure out where we're having tough spots, and we address those. We either address them with lights, or we address them, we either address them with primary lights, or we address them with static lights, or whatever we need to do. But that is more of a case-by-case situation. Now, if you're asking about rendering for characters, like I model characters and I want to have a nice turntable of my characters, there's a lot of nice software that, like a lot of our guys will use, they'll use, what is it, Marmoset, or they'll use, is it Moto? Is it another one? We also have, I think they use Marmoset, but we also have an internal viewer where we can display any model with any existing environment, or not environment, but sky dome that we use in the game. So there's different ways to present your work.
Cool.
So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully I answered his question as far as, I know I spelled out 3 different options that are used at different times for different.
Yeah. No, I think you did a great job at that. So Kerr would like to know, would I be more employable as applying for a lighting artist or as an environment artist? What's your take?
I think that there's more competition in terms of the amount of people that are in the industry as environment artists versus lighting artists. Every year there's more and more people in the job pool, if you will. That's not to make you feel insecure or make you feel like you're on a timer. But I do think that there are more people that go to school for animation and environment art than there are people that come in with a lighting background. Lighting, as far as I know, I don't know if can you go to school and just study lighting for games, or is it's more of like a subset, right? Like you probably study
most of it
game
is
design
just
in general, and you probably have a class or maybe even just a a couple days that you spend on lighting, right?
Yeah, exactly. Most of it is just a subset, I think.
Yeah.
You'll learn general lighting, but nothing specific. So
Having an understanding of image-based lighting, have an understanding of how HDR works, having an understanding of physically based materials. And I don't mean you have to write your own materials. I just mean if we're having a conversation, you know why physically based materials are used, you know what the advantages are, you have an understanding of how they work. And it's really in the name. The reason that physically based materials are awesome is because they are physically based. They respond in a way that that they would in real life. And that means that if I have a nighttime scene like this one and I want to change it to a daytime scene, the material, and there's nothing physically based about these materials, by the way. These are just downloaded from the rail. But the idea is that they work the same. So I don't have to reauthor my materials because I'm using them in a different lighting context. That is why generally most AAA games are moving towards a physically based model. So having an understanding of all that stuff to me is what's important. A lot of the guys we hired quite a few people recently for the lighting team, and so I was a part of a lot of these interviews, and we met great people. We met awesome people. It was a shame that we could only pick, one or two depending on the role that we were filling. We met a lot of great people, but the ones that really excited us were the ones that kind of had a background. They already knew what we were working on, and we felt like these are guys that are going to help us make this better. Because they have a different perspective. They know their stuff, but they might be approaching the problem from a slightly different angle than we are, and that's what makes for innovation. That's what makes for great development. Is that you're an artist and I'm an artist, and I see things a certain way, and you have a different perspective. And the difference between our perspectives, if we can collaborate, is what makes the magic of like this is a product of our combined imagination, our combined work, and our combined vision.
Cool. So speaking of materials, you mentioned a little earlier as part of the answer to this question. Vero was asking, do you also have any advice about the use of materials? Light cannot be seen until it hits the surface. Materials seem to me very important for a lighting artist to get the right mood.
Yes, materials are extremely important. They go hand in hand. It's a little tough with lighting because right now, as I'm just talking general industry norms, you have let's say like in a studio like mine, we have a lighting department and we have an environment department, and we have some environment artists that are that just do materials, and that they support the larger pool of environment artists that will do materials and environment work. But my point is, it requires a lot of communication and collaboration between artists. I feel very comfortable going to anybody in the studio and saying, hey, I'm having an issue with these materials, or I think that this is not responding the way that I expect it to respond. And it's an ongoing process, and it's a very new process too. So physically based materials is something that a lot of studios are getting into, but a lot of them do not have a pipeline, or do not have a standardization of how they're doing things. And so this is a very valuable field where if someone comes in as a material artist and say, yes, I have an understanding of this, I have an understanding of albedos, roughness, and how bright values need to be so that when they are placed in game, they respond correctly, that's very important. And that is something that you don't have to be a master at, but you have to, if you know how that works, that'll make you, in my opinion, a lot more marketable. At the same time, if you're coming in as a lighter, having an understanding of that. If you're coming in as a lighter and you, let's say, for example, have an understanding of Painter because you set up your materials in Painter and you're working in a PBR context, that really helps as well. And just to give you an example, and not, I'm really not trying to show like a lot of personal work because I don't want to, I want to kind of answer more questions and I don't want to make this a commercial, but this is an example of just some personal work that I did where all of these materials on this airship were generated through Painter. They're all physically correct. and they are responding to their environment in a very accurate way. There are things that could be better about it. There are things that could be a lot sharper, or maybe the albedos could be tuned a little bit better. But for the most part, for 90% of this image, it's working. And being able to have that foundation and being able to say, this is why it works, and I know why it works. I know there's a reason why I did this and how I did this, and I know that this is correct, is very valuable to a game development pipeline.
Cool. So, so talking about just, just the overall, just your pipeline and workflow. So Pablo's asking, obviously the class is geared towards, lighting for games, but do you think some of the principles of what they're going to be learning in this class are applicable to lighting for visual effects?
I think that in concept, when we're talking about contrast, we're talking about the transitioning of light. When we're talking about some of these artistic terms, yes, I do. However, if your goal is to get into lighting, did you say lighting for film or lighting for the question was lighting for VFX or for film? Maybe?
The question was for VFX specifically.
The thing about games is that when we're lighting for games, we are lighting under the constraints, very, very big constraints of the hardware and the game engine. And these are things that you don't have in terms of if you're rendering if you're rendering for VFX or you're rendering for, and when you say VFX, I assume that you're talking about commercials or maybe some film work.
More film.
Not like VFX for games. It's something else.
Yeah.
So I think that conceptually it can help, but I think that if that's really what you want to do, then you might want to look at a class that talks about. There are classes that are like lighting for production rendering, right? So for like commercials or for products, I think those would be super helpful. And or you might just want to take something that's just more of a software rendering, like a V-Ray class or Arnold or something like that just talks about rendering without the limitations that we have. A big part of what I talk about are the limitations in terms of gameplay, in terms of lighting. So, for example, I can show you a mode here if I. Sorry, visualizers. Sorry, maybe I'm getting lost here. You know what? I can show you a mode. We'll do this in a sec, but where we evaluate how dense the lighting is in the scene and how many lights I have in an area. And there are specific limitations where we don't want to have more than X amount of lights in the scene because here we are. Light complexity. So there are situations where we don't want to have. This is all very lean, right? So the way that this works is as the colors get brighter, that means that there's more lights touching the surfaces, and your frame rate is going to suffer because of that, right? So if I take a light here and I duplicate it and I duplicate it and I duplicate it a few more times, I can see that the performance of my scene, what this map mode is telling me is that the performance of my scene is being hit harder in this area because I have more lights touching these surfaces. This is just an example of one of the many concerns that we have to take into account when we're lighting for games. You don't need to worry about this if you're lighting for VFX. You might need to worry about breaking things down into elements because you're going to hand these elements to a compositor. You might have to worry about generating different passes or different masks. And because these are two very large differences in the pipelines, if you really want to go into VFX, I would probably recommend something a little more in line with the kind of rendering you'll be doing in that system.
Yeah, and I'm actually gonna go ahead and shamelessly plug one of our lighting and shading with Arnold. For my course that we have available. So all right. So speaking of the differences between games and visual effects lighting, What about studio to studio? So what because I know you've worked at both Naughty Dog and you're currently at IW and worked at tons of other studios. What would you say the difference between lighting at Naughty Dog versus lighting at Infinity Ward?
Um, well, I mean, every studio has its own. Every studio has, every studio is the same, but they're different, right? It's kind of weird. I would definitely say, and I want to be clear that it's been a while since I've worked at Naughty Dog. I worked at Naughty Dog up until 2011, so it's been 7 years. Naughty Dog, when I was working on the Uncharted projects, were a lot more. Our process was more eyeballing things, and if it looks good, it is good, and that's totally valid. And this was pre-PBR. This was in a pre-PBR. This is PlayStation 3, just starting to get into PlayStation 4. So we were not PBR compliant. We were not using HDR. We were barely getting into HDR, but weren't really using it effectively. And a lot of what we were doing was not physically correct, but it was visually compelling, and that's what we would go for. So, as an example, we would cheat our indirect light considerably. Almost everything that we did had the indirect light, doubled or tripled or just really, really exaggerated. At Infinity Ward, we are working, especially on this current game, we are working with a much more not a much more. We are working with a physically correct shading model, which means that we want to have our values be more accurate or as accurate as possible in terms of our HDR, our sky images, in terms of our lighting intensities. We have actually switched, I believe, over the last game, we switched our units of lighting to be physical units, right? So we work in, I think we work in candelas or kilocandelas, which is a real world measurement for lighting. And generally, when we work, even though our lights are based in kilocandelas, as artists, what we work in is exposure values. So an exposure value is a measurement of intensity on the target or the surface of something that is receiving the light, and it is based on a camera. And so every camera can when you take a picture, that picture, the exposure value of that picture is derived or it's based on 3 different things: how fast your shutter speed is, how sensitive your sensor is, and how big your aperture is, how much light you let into the camera at the time that you capture. Those 3 things will equal an exposure value, and those exposure values are very consistent, and it's very easy to make adjustments and to plot changes once you are working in that scale, that unit of measurement, and your system is set up for that.
Cool. No, that's great. Great answer. So Vishal wants to know, can you recommend any lighting communities for games, or lighting for games communities, whether it's Discord or Slack? Anything that comes to mind?
I don't. Unfortunately, I don't have anything that comes to mind, and I think Manny can probably answer this question too with, CG Society, or maybe something that CGMA is sponsoring, or is thinking about sponsoring in the near future. I don't know of any dedicated communities for that. I have a Facebook group that I have started for my students.
That's what I was going to recommend, Omar.
Alums of the class. And it's something that Manny and I have talked about in terms of, I don't know if, I think at some point Facebook is not going to be in a good format for this because it's Facebook. I'd like to keep it, right now it's a private group, so it's students that take my class are in the group, but it's not really open to the public. And Manny and I have kind of talked about opening it up to the public, but I would want to kind of keep it somehow about lighting for games, but about lighting for games, and not just a bunch of, I don't want it to just turn into like a random Facebook group where people are posting,
just random stuff.
Yeah,
on.
just things that aren't about that.
Yeah. So, I just slacked. I just posted a link to the CG Society forum that's lighting and shading.
Okay.
So definitely take a look at that. That has been pretty popular. It's like, for quite some time. There's been a lot of challenges that take place within this forum as well. And as Omar mentioned, it's like, it's something we've talked about in terms of having having Omar kind of be a part of this, community as well, and doing like a specific thing. Lighting is definitely one of those topics, as important as it is, as vital as a component as it is to any production. It is something that there's not tons of resources,
Right.
and references and communities out there for it. So,
Yeah.
which
And,
is a
and
testament to just to the how many people sign up for this session in the
yeah,
first place.
this is amazing, and I think that there's a kind of I've talked to many about this, that there's a frontier there where we can, we should think about setting something like that up. Um, I think
Definitely,
it would be great.
we'll keep you guys abreast as it relates to what that looks like in the future. So,
Other than
um,
that, I think there are sub threads on like ArtStation and 80 Level and a couple of other websites, but yeah, there's not like a dedicated lighting group.
yeah.
Um, so yeah,
So, so we're kind of rearing the end of this session, which has been amazing so far. I know you guys have tons of questions. It's like that we haven't gone into. I think once we get past a few more of these, I would love to ask Omar to come back for part two. You
yeah,
know,
I would love to do that, and like I said, I'm happy to we can post the written answers that I've done.
yes, yes,
If
which
you
I'm
want to
willing to do.
maybe collect some more, maybe I can do a few more. I say we kind of just
Yeah, there were
build
some
up a
really good
bucket full.
ones. There were some really good ones on the session. There's still tons more. So I think,
Yeah,
yeah,
and
I'll compile all those together.
I wish I wish I could hang out and do this all day. I love to talk about art and games and and the like.
Yeah.
So
So
I'd
the
be
last
happy
the
to do it
last
again.
question the last question would be, and I know we touched upon your course here and there, but could you give us an overview of an overview of your course, what's going to be covered, and what students should expect from this course for the entire 10 weeks?
Yeah, I could. Uh, this is also stated on the class page. But just to give you like an introduction, my course demonstrates a practical approach to in-game real-time lighting, and it does that um, within the context of a production pipeline. So we're working in Unreal Engine as it's an easily accessible platform. However, the workflow and the techniques that I'm presenting are it's as much of a software-agnostic format as possible. And this is because many studios use either proprietary or heavily modified engines that are unique or exclusive to that studio's pipeline. So my idea is that these techniques will apply to any contemporary pipeline. And my course is designed to guide students through weekly examinations of different lighting scenarios, environments, and gameplay styles. I demonstrate how to approach lighting them, the workflow that I use to get them from a conceptual state to a working playable level. And I will also provide all of the necessary scene files for each week. And beyond that, I invite you to visit my class page at the CGMA website or to contact CGMA directly for more details.
Cool. No, that's great. So, and any parting words, Omar, before we sign off? We're probably gonna go for another 5 minutes. I'm sorry, I just sent a poll, which I should have sent probably 10 minutes ago, regarding interest in Omar's class. So
Okay.
please, if you guys have a chance to just fill that out, and we could provide you some more information as it relates to the class. I know we didn't get to a lot of the questions that were course specific, but so yeah, so please fill that out. But yeah, Omar, any parting words of
Um, uh,
wisdom?
I I want to thank everybody for doing this. It's humbling for me to be able to do this and to have so many people be interested. Um, so I'm very grateful. I'm grateful to you, Manny, and CGMA, and everybody over there. I'm grateful to all the students that have taken my course, and to all the potential students that are interested in it. It's an honor and it's a privilege to be able to impart some of my knowledge onto you guys.
Cool.
As far as I'm not a I'm not a mage. I'm not a wizard. I'm like anybody else. So you know, we're all artists, we're all sensitive, we all, you know, we all are generally as artists tend to be a little more in tune with our emotions and with our insecurities. And so I would just encourage anybody out there that wants to get into this to just, you know, keep your head up, keep practicing, don't get discouraged don't get discouraged when you try to do something it doesn't look great right away. It is a process. It is a process, and it is something that we're all. The way I see it is we're all on the same road together. Some of us just a little further along the path, and others are getting started. But it is a process and a journey, and I just encourage you to stay positive and to just keep practicing, keep doing it. Try to focus on what you're excited about and chase that. You know, if you're excited about skies, man, go capture some awesome skies or make some cool levels with cool skies. If you're into local lighting or just to give you a quick example, this is the Facebook page that my class has, and this is I encourage the students to post some of their work. This is actually Carmen here. This is some of her reference, but she was doing some amazing stuff with a very whimsical environment. I'm trying to find it now. I can't find it. But a lot of these are just different students posting their various projects. I encourage you to look at other people's work. I encourage you to be excited about movies, film, TVs, painting. It's all the same. It's all art, and it really all boils down to the same thing once you get to the heart of it. So yeah, hopefully that doesn't sound too terribly cheesy. It's a lot of what I'm saying is just kind of based on what I wish someone had told me when I was at that stage in my either in my education or in my career.
Cool. Could you show the Maya renderer that you had going on?
Let me see. As a matter of fact, I can show you. So that I just had baking while we were talking, but I can actually show you some finished outputs of it here. And this is just kind of me playing around. Like this needs a lot of work, and this is a good example where, as an artist, I'm a little bit embarrassed to show you this because my textures are a little bit off. You know, the noise is big. The values aren't quite dialed in. It's very much a work in progress. But it is also a good example of how art never really stops. I can keep working on this forever, and it probably still wouldn't be perfect. So I think it's important for us to be in touch with that, to share our ideas, to share our progress, and to learn from what we're doing. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that this experience of teaching has been really, it's been really valuable to me. It's been really important to me because I feel that I learn as much as my students. Every time I do a term and I get through a semester, I feel that my students teach me, as much as I hopefully am teaching them. So it's been a really good experience.
Cool. Well, once again, Omar, thank you so much again for your time. And thank you for just sharing your knowledge and experience with us. And everybody else, thank you so much for attending. And once again, it's like for those of you guys who came in a little late, or want a recap on everything, we'll be sending you guys a link probably sometime Monday with a recap of just the entire session. And we also have lots more of these coming up over the next couple of weeks. I believe the next one is next Saturday, which is mastering hair for games with Johan. Definitely, if you guys are interested in more real-time technology and information, definitely sign up for that. But once again, thank you guys for spending a couple of hours with us on your weekend. Omar, thank you again. Someone said to say goodbye to the kid behind you. Say goodbye to Aiden.
Aiden says goodbye. He's the next generation of lighters.
There you go.
We'll get him started.
All right, guys.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Thank you, Manny. Thanks. It's a pleasure.
Cool. Definitely. You guys enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
All right. Bye.